This week's book is Selling Britishness, Commodity Culture, The Dominions and Empire by Felicity Barnes. Our reviewer is Nevil Gibson. Nevil, that title is a bit of a mouthful. What's it about exactly?
Well, it signals that it's an academic book from the Auckland University Press, but a lot of their books actually got a lot of information in them, stories, but they usually, with today's postmodernism affecting history, they try and look at the past, but using ideas of the present. And that book does a bit of that because it's basically a book about how products from New Zealand, Australia and Canada were sold to the British housewife, mainly or consumer, 1920s and 30s, using the empire as a kind of marketing tool. And of course, the meat and veggies and fruit producers are only interested really in selling the products. But when historians look at it, they look at it through quite different eyes and see that underneath that is a kind of what you might call messages going across.
So, yeah, it sounds like the author has a message in looking at this period in New Zealand's history.
They certainly do, because the message, of course, is that society is structured into racial, gender and other class divisions, and any kind of marketing, even this sort of marketing, which is basically just trying to sell products across the grocery or butcher store, is to layer into this that there was a message behind there about imperial qualities, promoting the idea of being British, not just in Britain itself, but also in New Zealand, Australia and Canada.
The 1920s and 30s were the first sort of golden age for advertising. What was its role in selling New Zealand goods?
Yeah, well, in this book there's a lot of information about the advertising industry, meat and produce, and how it was sold and that sort of thing. And also in the 20s and 30s was the first time that consumer advertising, we're talking here not New Zealand products that went there like wool or or wheat from Canada, which was used in baking, but these were branded goods, and they're all branded like the apples, from New Zealand and Canada and Australia, all had the word British. A famous saying about New Zealand lamb was that British to the backbone. So you can sort of see how an academic, looking at it through a different prism, is going to latch on to this kind of marketing.
The Empire Marketing Board, which was set up by the British government, had a part to play in this as well, but then it dissolved or didn't last long. What happened there? Yeah,
well, it was set up by the British government to encourage the British consumer to buy goods from the colonies, not just the traditional white settler ones, but also Africa and India and that sort of thing. But the board didn't have much. It basically wasn't very good at doing its job, and most economic historians who have covered it said basically it didn't succeed. But the rocks on which it fell was really the rise of protectionism and the end of free trade in 1933, and so there wasn't really a purpose there. But one of its legacies was the famous King's Christmas cake, which was made up of sultanas, say from Australia. It was made up of suet from New Zealand, and of course it had apples from Canada. And at one stage the Australians made one just 3/4 of a tonne, and they put it on display at Australia House.
What about the cinema? What sort of role did that play as well?
Yeah, movies were pretty big. All three countries, the colonial countries, all set up film boards to make shorts to promote themselves, and these were shown before the features in the cinemas. In many cases, these films became quite an attraction in themselves. New Zealand had ones on meat and one called Meadow to Market, and all promoting the meat board or the dairy board or whatever. And people, sometimes I'd roll all of these into a big feature presentation, and people queued to go to these movies to watch what life was like in these countries.
It all sounds fairly pointy-headed, but quite interesting at the same time. Is it likely to appeal to the general reader?
I think so. It's got a very good cover. This is the work. I saw it actually, a lot of industrial art in the Manchester Art Gallery, and so there's a lot of posters from that time. And I think you'll find, although it's a bit heavy to get around the framework of the author's what she's trying to prove, but there's a lot of anecdotes, and it tells you a lot about the activities of the producer boards and farmers and the promotion of agricultural produce. That's what we're talking about in England during that interwar period.
Nevil, thanks very much for your time.
It was a pleasure.